There is a question that has followed human beings across every continent, every century, and every civilization we have ever built. It has been debated in ancient temples and modern laboratories. It has inspired some of the most sophisticated philosophy ever written and some of the most bitter arguments ever had. It sits underneath nearly every religion humanity has ever practiced, underneath our rituals for the dead, underneath the way we think about love, identity, memory, and what it means for a person to matter. The question is this: is there something about you that is more than your physical body? Most people, when they hear that question, immediately reach for the word soul. And most scientists, when they hear that same word, immediately step back. The word carries too much history, too many competing definitions, too much emotional and theological weight. It feels like the kind of question that belongs to religion and philosophy, not to physics, not to neuroscience, not to the kind of careful, evidence-based inquiry that has sent probes beyond the edge of the solar system and mapped the structure of DNA. But here is what makes this particular moment in history unusual. Right now, at the beginning of the 21st century, a small but serious group of physicists, philosophers, and neuroscientists are finding that the gap between the scientific study of the mind and the ancient question of the soul is considerably smaller than most people assume. Not because science has somehow proven that souls exist, it has not, but because the scientific study of consciousness, the study of why and how we have inner experience at all, has run directly into a wall that the best tools in science have not been able to break through. And when scientists began looking more carefully at the shape of that wall, some of them noticed something surprising. The wall looks remarkably like the question philosophers and theologians have been circling for thousands of years. This video is about that wall. It is about what lies on both sides of it. It is about what science has genuinely established, where science's current frameworks reach their limit, and what the world's great philosophical and spiritual traditions have said about the territory beyond that limit. It is not going to tell you that the soul is real. It is not going to tell you that it is an illusion. What it is going to do is take the question seriously, which, it turns out, is harder than it sounds. So, the question nobody can fully answer. It is worth being precise about what makes it so difficult. When scientists study a problem, say the behavior of light or the mechanics of cell division or the dynamics of a hurricane, they are studying something they can observe from the outside. They can measure it, model it, run experiments on it, and compare their predictions with what actually happens. The method works extraordinarily well. It has produced a picture of the physical world that is, in many respects, staggeringly detailed and accurate. Consciousness is different. Consciousness is not something you can observe from the outside. You can observe the brain from the outside. You can watch neurons fire, or measure electrical signals, track blood flow through tissue. But the actual experience of being conscious, the fact that there is something it feels like to see the color blue, to hear a piece of music, to recognize the face of someone you love, that experience is not visible from the outside. It is only ever directly available from the inside. You know you are conscious because you are having an experience right now. You cannot directly verify that anyone else is conscious in the same way. You infer it reasonably from their behavior and their similarity to you. But the direct, first-person fact of experience is inherently private in a way that makes it deeply resistant to the standard tools of scientific investigation. This is not a new observation. Philosophers have noticed it for centuries. But what is new is that neuroscience has now advanced to the point where it can describe the brain's activity in extraordinary detail, and has discovered in doing so that the description never quite closes the gap. The map of the brain keeps getting more detailed. The experience of being conscious remains in some fundamental way unexplained by the map. That gap between the objective description of the brain and the subjective reality of experience is where this entire documentary lives. And it turns out to be a gap with interesting neighbors. Quantum physics, which operates at the smallest scales of physical reality, has its own unresolved questions about the role of the observer in determining what is real. Ancient philosophical traditions, Greek, Abrahamic, Indigenous, developed detailed accounts of the relationship between mind, our body, and world that were not simply guesses, but carefully reasoned frameworks. And a handful of empirical researchers have spent careers collecting data about consciousness that does not fit comfortably into the standard materialist picture. The word gets used constantly. It appears in religious texts, in pop songs, in eulogies, in philosophy papers, in arguments about artificial intelligence, and in casual conversation. People say someone has a lot of soul and means something about depth of character. They say body and soul and means something about total commitment. They say rest her soul and means something about what persists after death. The word is everywhere. And yet, if you stop and ask someone to define it precisely, to say exactly what they mean when they use it, most people find themselves reaching for other vague words, circling the idea without landing on it. That vagueness is not a sign of stupidity. It is a sign that the word is doing several different jobs at once, and that those jobs have been quietly bundled together for so long that most people have forgotten they are separate. Unpacking those jobs is not just a philosophical housekeeping exercise. It is essential for everything that follows in this documentary, because the question, is the soul a quantum phenomenon, means something very different depending on which version of the soul you are asking about. Asking whether quantum mechanics explains personal identity is a different question from asking whether quantum mechanics explains why you have inner experience, which is again a different question from asking whether quantum mechanics might explain what happens to consciousness after the body dies. These questions overlap, but they are not the same question. Treating them as one is how this debate has produced so much heat and so little light. So let us take the bundled concept apart carefully and lay out its components. The first and oldest use of the word soul concerns what we might call the animating principle. This is the soul as the thing that makes a living body alive. The difference between a person and a corpse, between a bird in flight and a bird on a taxidermist's shelf. In this sense, the soul is not about consciousness or identity or survival after death. It is simply about life itself. What is it that a body has when it is living that it loses when it dies? For most of human history, the answer was the soul. This sense of the word is actually the oldest, and it appears across cultures with remarkable consistency. The ancient Hebrew word nephesh, the Greek word psyche, the Latin anima, all of them, in their earliest uses, referred to breath, to the animating force of life, before they accumulated the additional meanings they carry today. This first sense is the one that science has, in a meaningful way, addressed. Modern biology has provided a detailed account of what makes living systems different from non-living ones. Metabolism, reproduction, homeostasis, the self-sustaining organization of chemical processes. We no longer need to invoke a special animating substance to explain why a living body is alive. The biochemistry does that work. This does not mean the question of life is entirely settled. The origin of life remains genuinely mysterious. But the animating soul in this narrow sense has been substantially absorbed into biology. The second use of the word concerns identity. This is the soul as the answer to the question, who are you exactly? Not your body, which replaces most of its atoms every few years. Not your memories, which are incomplete, reconstructed, and sometimes false. Not your personality, which shifts with mood, age, and circumstance. So what is the continuous thread that makes you the same person who existed 10 years ago and will, presumably, exist 10 years from now? Most philosophical and religious traditions have called that thread the soul. It is the self considered as something stable and persistent, beneath the flux of physical and psychological change. This is a question that philosophy has not resolved, and that neuroscience has only complicated. The more carefully you look at the brain and its processes, the less obvious it becomes that there is a stable, unified self at all. Some neuroscientists and philosophers argue that the self is a kind of ongoing narrative the brain constructs, a story told by billions of neurons that creates the impression of a continuous experiencer, where there may be only a continuous process. Whether that means the soul as identity is an illusion, or simply a different kind of reality than we assumed, is precisely the kind of question this documentary is interested in. The third use, and the one most people reach for first, concerns survival. This is the soul as whatever it is that might persist after the body dies. It is the soul of religious promise and philosophical argument, the soul whose fate is the subject of theology, the soul whose existence would make death something other than annihilation. This is the sense of the word that carries the most emotional weight, and it is also the sense that is hardest to address empirically. What we can say is that this question is not entirely outside the reach of evidence. There are researchers who have tried to bring it into the domain of empirical investigation, and we will examine that work honestly in later chapters. The fourth use is the one that is most relevant to the quantum mechanics portion of this documentary, and it is the one that gets the least attention in ordinary conversation. And this is the soul as consciousness, as the bare fact of subjective experience. Not who you are, not whether you survive death, but simply, why is there something it is like to be you at all? Why does experience exist? Why is the universe not just a collection of physical processes proceeding in darkness, with no inner light of awareness anywhere? This is the use of soul that maps most directly onto what philosophers call the problem of consciousness. And it is the use that will drive the scientific and philosophical arguments at the center of this documentary. When we ask whether the soul is a quantum phenomenon, what we are primarily asking is whether the fact of conscious experience, the existence of an inner life, might be connected to quantum-level processes in the physical world, or might require an expansion of our physical picture of reality to accommodate it. Philosophy did not invent the soul, but it did something almost as significant. It turned the soul into an argument. And once the soul became an argument, it became something that could be examined, challenged, refined, and passed down across generations in a form precise enough to be genuinely useful. That transformation happened in Athens, roughly 24 centuries ago, and the terms it established are still shaping the debate today in ways that most people involved in that debate do not fully realize. The Greek word was psyche. In its earliest usage, before the philosophers got hold of it, psyche meant something close to breath or life force, the animating principle we identified in the previous chapter as the oldest sense of the word soul. But by the 5th century BC, the word had begun to accumulate new weight. It was starting to mean not just the thing that made a body alive, but the thing that made a person who they were, the seat of thought, feeling, and moral character. It was in this richer sense that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle took it up, and it was in their hands that the soul debate took the form that would echo through Western philosophy, theology, and eventually science for the next 2.5 millennia. Socrates left no writings. What we know of his views comes primarily through Plato, who was his student and who used him as the central character in a series of dialogues that rank among the most carefully constructed philosophical texts ever produced. This creates an interpretive difficulty. Historians still debate how much of Socrates in the dialogues reflects the historical man and how much reflects Plato's own developing thought. For our purposes, that distinction matters less than the arguments themselves, which are what have survived and what have influenced everything that came after. The dialogue most directly relevant to the soul question is the Phaedo, set on the day of Socrates' execution in 399 BC. Facing death, Socrates argues, calmly, systematically, without apparent fear, that the soul is not only distinct from the body, but is in fact more real than the body, and that death, properly understood, is not an ending, but a liberation. His arguments are several, and they are worth examining individually because they are not simply assertions of faith. They are reasoned positions. The first argument turns on the nature of opposites. Socrates observes that in the natural world, opposites generate each other. Sleeping generates waking, waking generates sleeping, living generates dying. If this pattern holds consistently, then dying must generate living in turn. The soul must persist through death and return, as it has presumably done before birth. This argument strikes most modern readers as weak, and it probably struck some of Plato's contemporaries the same way. But it establishes an important premise, that the soul's existence before birth is being taken as seriously as its existence after death. The soul, in this framework, is not something that begins when a body begins. It pre-exists. The second and more philosophically durable argument concerns the nature of knowledge. Socrates points to mathematical and logical truths, the perfect equality of two abstract units, the properties of a perfect circle, and notes that we never encounter these things perfectly in the physical world. Physical objects are never perfectly equal, never perfectly circular. And yet we recognize imperfect physical examples as approximations of perfect abstract standards. How do we know what perfect equality looks like if we have never seen it in the physical world? Plato's answer, developed across multiple dialogues, is that we knew it before birth, in a non-physical realm where the soul had direct access to pure abstract forms. Learning in this view is really recollection, the soul remembering what it knew before it was embodied. This argument has considerably more philosophical force. It is pointing at something genuinely puzzling: the relationship between the abstract structures of mathematics and logic and the physical world in which we encounter only approximations of those structures. That puzzle has not gone away. It is still actively debated in the philosophy of mathematics under the heading of Platonism, the view that mathematical objects are real, mind-independent entities that mathematicians discover rather than invent. Several prominent mathematicians and physicists, including figures we will encounter later in this documentary, hold something close to this view. The third argument is perhaps the most direct. Plato argues that the soul belongs to the category of things that are simple, invisible, unchanging, and eternal, the same category as the abstract forms. The body belongs to the category of things that are composite, visible, changing, and perishable. Since dissolution and death apply only to composite things, and since the soul is not composite, the soul cannot be dissolved or destroyed. It is, by its nature, imperishable. This is the argument that passed most directly into Christian theology, particularly through Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, who was steeped in Platonic philosophy and who shaped the Christian doctrine of the soul more than almost any other single thinker. The Platonic soul, immaterial, individual, immortal, more real than the body it temporarily inhabits, became the template for the Western religious conception of the soul that most people in the modern world have inherited, whether or not they are themselves religious. But Aristotle disagreed, fundamentally, carefully, and in writing. Aristotle was Plato's student for nearly 20 years, and he absorbed the Platonic framework deeply enough to argue against it with precision. His own account of the soul appears primarily in a treatise called De Anima, On the Soul, written in the middle of the 4th century BC. And his opening move is to reject the entire Platonic framework of soul and body as two separate kinds of thing that happen to be temporarily combined. For Aristotle, the soul is not a separate entity that enters a body from outside. The soul is the form of a living body, the organizing principle that makes a particular arrangement of matter into a living, functioning organism of a specific kind. He illustrates this with an analogy that has become famous in philosophy. If the eye were an animal, he says, sight would be its soul. Sight is not a thing inside the eye. It is what the eye does, what makes the eye an eye rather than just a lump of tissue. Remove sight from the eye, and the eye is no longer really an eye in any meaningful sense. It is just matter that happens to have the shape of an eye. Plato's immaterial, immortal soul did not travel into the modern world on its own. It needed carriers, institutions, texts, and thinkers with enough reach to embed it into the foundations of entire civilizations. The three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, became that carrier system. Together, they shaped the beliefs of more than half the human beings alive on Earth today, and each of them has something distinct and carefully developed to say about the soul. But what is most interesting, and least often acknowledged, is how much they disagree with each other, and how internally complicated each tradition is when you look closely enough. Begin with Judaism, because it is the oldest of the three, and because its scriptural foundations are shared, in whole or in part, by the other two. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, does not present a single unified doctrine of the soul. The word most commonly translated as soul in English versions of the Hebrew text is nephesh, and its meaning in context is considerably more physical and earthbound than the Platonic soul we encountered in the previous chapter. In Genesis, when God forms Adam from the dust of the ground and breathes into his nostrils, Adam becomes a living nephesh, a living being, a living creature. The nephesh is not something inserted into the body from outside. It is what the body becomes when animated. In its earliest biblical usage, it is closer to Aristotle than to Plato. This matters because it means the ancient Hebrew conception of the person was fundamentally integrated. Body and soul were not two separate things in uneasy combination, but a single unified living being. The implications for what happens after death are significant. Early Hebrew scripture is notably uninterested in individual afterlife. The dead go to Sheol, a shadowy, grey underworld of diminished existence that is emphatically not heaven, and that applies to everyone regardless of moral character. The idea of individual immortality, of the soul surviving death in a meaningful and conscious way, develops relatively late in Jewish thought. And when it does develop, particularly in the book of Daniel, written in the 2nd century BC, it tends to take the form of bodily resurrection rather than the survival of a disembodied soul. This is a crucial distinction. Resurrection means the whole person, body included, is restored to life. It is not the Platonic story of the soul escaping its bodily prison and returning to its true spiritual home. It is a story about restoration and wholeness, about the body being part of what matters. Later Jewish philosophy, particularly in the medieval period through figures like Maimonides in the 12th century AD, incorporated more Platonic and Aristotelian elements under the influence of Greek and Islamic philosophy. But the underlying tension between the integrated biblical person and the dualistic Greek soul was never fully resolved, and it remains a live debate within Jewish thought today. Christianity inherits this tension and, in some respects, intensifies it. The earliest Christian writings, Paul's letters, which predate the Gospels, use a Greek vocabulary that carries Platonic overtones. But Paul's actual theology of the afterlife is, like the Hebrew tradition he came from, focused on bodily resurrection rather than the immortality of a disembodied soul. When Paul writes about the resurrection of the dead in his first letter to the Corinthians, he is not describing souls floating up to heaven. He is describing a transformed bodily existence, a spiritual body, distinct from the current physical body, but still a body. The fully developed Christian doctrine of the immortal soul, the one that became standard in Western Christianity, owes an enormous debt to Augustine of Hippo, a writing in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Augustine was deeply formed by Neoplatonism, the philosophical tradition that had elaborated and mystified Plato's original framework in the centuries after his death. For Augustine, the soul is immaterial, rational, and immortal. And it is the soul, not the body, that bears the image of God. The body is not evil in Augustine's view, but it is clearly the junior partner in the human constitution. This Augustinian synthesis, Platonic soul structure wrapped in Christian theological content, became the dominant framework for Western Christian thinking about the soul for over 1,000 years. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century AD attempted a significant revision, a drawing on the newly recovered works of Aristotle to argue that the soul is the form of the body, a position much closer to Aristotle's original, while still maintaining its immateriality and immortality. This Thomistic synthesis became the official position of the Catholic Church and remains so today. But the tension between the Platonic and Aristotelian inheritances never fully disappeared, and Protestant theology introduced further variations, with some traditions emphasizing the soul's immediate conscious survival after death, and others holding that the soul sleeps unconsciously until the final resurrection. The point is not to adjudicate between these positions. It is to show that even within a single religious tradition, the soul is a far more contested and complicated concept than casual reference to it usually suggests. The Islam brings a strikingly different emphasis. The Arabic word for soul used in the Quran is ruh, and its most theologically significant appearance comes in Surah Al-Isra, the 17th chapter, where someone asks the Prophet about the nature of the ruh. The divine response, as recorded in the Quran, is notably and deliberately brief. The ruh is of the command of my Lord, and of knowledge you have been given only a little. This is not an evasion. It is a theological statement, a deliberate placement of the soul's ultimate nature beyond the reach of human understanding. The soul, in this framing, is real. It is of divine origin. It survives death and faces judgment, but its inner nature is not available to human inquiry. This is a position worth pausing on. The Quran, one of the most widely read texts in human history, it contains an explicit acknowledgement that the soul is beyond human comprehension, built into its core teaching. That is not the same as saying the soul is unreal or unimportant. The Quran treats it as enormously important. But it establishes a kind of intellectual humility about the soul's ultimate nature that is written into the foundations of Islamic theology. The soul matters. What it ultimately is, we do not know. Every tradition examined so far, Greek, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, shares one underlying assumption that is so deeply embedded it rarely gets named explicitly. That assumption is this: the soul belongs to the individual. It is something a person has or is or carries. It is located in some meaningful sense inside the boundary of a single human being. Even when those traditions disagree about everything else, whether the soul is separable from the body, whether it survives death, whether it is knowable, they agree that the soul is fundamentally a personal possession, something that is yours, that individuates you, that constitutes your particular existence as distinct from everyone else's. This assumption is so natural to people formed by Western philosophical and religious traditions that it can be difficult to even notice it as an assumption. It feels like common sense. Of course, the soul belongs to the individual. Where else would it belong? The answer, from a significant portion of the world's philosophical and spiritual traditions, is it belongs to the relationship. It belongs to the land. It belongs to the ancestors. It belongs to the community of living and non-living beings, of which any individual is only one temporary expression. The soul, in many indigenous and animist frameworks, is not a private interior possession. It is a node in a web of connections, and the web is more fundamental than the node. This is not a minor variation on the Western theme. It is a genuinely different ontology, a different account of what kinds of things are real and what kind of thing a self ultimately is. and it deserves to be examined on its own terms rather than treated as a colorful cultural variation on the standard story. Take the Lakota people of the North American Great Plains. Lakota spiritual thought does not map neatly onto Western categories, and any summary risks distortion, but some features can be described with reasonable accuracy. The Lakota concept of Wakantanka, often translated as Great Spirit, but more accurately understood as something like the Great Mysterious or the Great Incomprehensible, refers not to a personal deity in the Western sense, but to the pervasive sacred quality of all existence. Everything that exists participates in this quality. The distinction between spiritual and physical that is foundational to most Western frameworks does not operate in the same way here. The world itself is alive with meaning and connection. Within this framework, what we might call the soul is not cleanly separable from one's relationships to family, to community, to the land, to the animals, to the ancestors, and to those not yet born. Personal identity in this account is relational through and through. You are not a self who then enters into relationships. You are, in some fundamental sense, constituted by your relationships. The boundary between self and world is more permeable, more negotiated than the Western individual soul allows. This has a direct consequence for what death means. If the self is constituted by relationships rather than being a self-contained unit that enters and exits relationships, then death does not mean the termination of a discrete individual soul entity. It means a transformation in the pattern of relationships. The ancestor becomes a different kind of presence in the web, rather than departing the web entirely. This is why ancestor veneration is so central to so many indigenous traditions worldwide. The ancestors are not simply remembered. They are understood to still be participants in the relational fabric of existence in a different mode. Move to the other side of the world, and a different but structurally related framework appears. The Aboriginal Australian concept of the dreaming, sometimes called the dream time, is one of the most philosophically distinctive accounts of time, identity, and spirit in the human record. The dreaming is not a historical past. It is not a mythological origin story in the sense of something that happened long ago and is now over. It is an ongoing dimension of reality, a level at which the patterns that shape all existence are continuously present and active, not bound by the linear flow of time that ordinary experience presents. In this framework, the individual human beings are understood as expressions of dreaming patterns, particular ancestral beings whose journeys across the land established the features of the world and the patterns of life that continue to unfold. A person's identity is not primarily their individual biography. It is their connection to a specific dreaming pattern, a specific ancestral thread that runs through time in a non-linear way. The self, in this account, has a dimension that is simply not located in ordinary time at all. This is genuinely difficult to translate into Western philosophical vocabulary without losing something essential. But there is one feature of it that is worth naming carefully, and because it will become relevant later in this documentary. The dreaming framework treats time as something other than a simple linear container in which events happen sequentially and then are gone. It treats the past as, in some sense, still present, not as memory, but as an ongoing dimension of reality that the present moment participates in. That is a strange idea by the standards of ordinary experience. It is considerably less strange by the standards of modern physics, where the relationship between time, space, and the observer has turned out to be far more complicated than intuition suggests. West African spiritual traditions, which vary enormously across hundreds of distinct cultures but share some structural features, offer a third variation on the relational theme. In many of these traditions, the soul is understood as multi-part rather than single. The Yoruba concept of the person, for example, involves several distinct spiritual components. The Ori is the individual's personal essence and destiny, something like a personal soul that one chooses before birth and that shapes one's life path. But this personal essence exists within a broader framework of connection to the Orisha, divine forces that operate through the natural world and through human communities, and to the ancestral lineage from which one comes and to which one will return. The multi-part soul is not unique to Yoruba thought. It appears in ancient Egyptian religion, in some Native American traditions, in certain Tibetan Buddhist frameworks. What it consistently does is resist the idea that the self is a simple, unified, single thing, nor the person is understood as a meeting point of multiple forces, relationships, and dimensions of existence. Death, in these frameworks, is not the extinction of a unified entity, but a disaggregation, the different components of the person moving in different directions, some returning to the ancestral realm, some dispersing back into the broader patterns of existence. For the first 5 chapters of this documentary, we have been moving through the history of how human beings have thought about the soul, the frameworks they built, the arguments they made, the assumptions they carried. Now the ground shifts. We move from what people have believed to what has actually been measured, tested, and established through systematic empirical investigation. We move into science, and the first thing science does, when it encounters the soul question, is reframe it entirely. Science does not ask, does the soul exist? That question, as traditionally posed, is not one science knows how to approach directly. What science asks instead is a narrower, more tractable version. What is the relationship between the brain and conscious experience? If we understand that relationship completely, we will at least know what any adequate account of the soul needs to explain or contradict. The investigation of that relationship, the neuroscience of consciousness, has produced results that are, depending on how you look at them, either enormously impressive or deeply humbling. In most respects, both at once. Start with what neuroscience has genuinely established, because it is considerable and should not be minimized. The brain is a physical organ of extraordinary complexity. It contains approximately 86 billion neurons, individual nerve cells, each of which can form thousands of connections with other neurons. The total number of connections, called synapses, is estimated in the hundreds of trillions. The patterns of electrical activity that move through this network are not random. They are structured, organized, and, crucially, they correlate with mental states in ways that are specific, reproducible, and increasingly well understood. When you look at a familiar face, specific regions of the brain activate, particularly an area in the temporal lobe called the fusiform face area. When that region is damaged by stroke or injury, the ability to recognize faces is selectively impaired, while other visual abilities remain intact. When you experience fear, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, shows characteristic activity. When that structure is damaged in certain ways, the experience of fear is diminished or altered, even when the person cognitively understands that a situation is dangerous. When language production is disrupted by damage to a region in the left frontal lobe, an area identified by the 19th century AD neurologist Paul Broca, the person loses the ability to speak fluently while retaining the ability to understand speech. These are not approximate correlations. They are precise, specific, and replicated across thousands of patients and dozens of research programs. The mapping between brain regions, brain processes, and mental functions is detailed enough that neurologists can often predict, from the location of a brain injury, exactly which aspect of a person's mental life will be affected. And the causal direction is not ambiguous. Change the brain, and you change the mind. Damage specific circuits and specific experiences or abilities disappear. Stimulate specific regions electrically, and specific sensations or memories arise. Administer anesthesia, and consciousness switches off. Let it wear off, and consciousness returns. All of this points overwhelmingly in one direction. The brain is not merely correlated with conscious experience. It is causally involved in producing or sustaining it in a deep and specific way. Whatever the soul ultimately is, any serious account of it has to reckon with this evidence. The days when it was intellectually respectable to simply wave at the brain as an irrelevant detail while discussing the soul are gone. And yet, here is where the story becomes genuinely interesting. Everything just described, the fusiform face area, the amygdala, Broca's area, the effects of anesthesia, tells us which parts of the brain are involved in which aspects of mental functioning. It tells us about the mechanisms. What it does not tell us, what neuroscience has so far been unable to tell us, despite decades of increasingly sophisticated investigation, is why any of this mechanism is accompanied by experience at all. Consider what is actually happening when you see a color. Light of a specific wavelength enters your eye, activates specific photoreceptor cells on your retina. Arno sends electrical signals along the optic nerve to the visual cortex at the back of your brain, where those signals are processed through multiple layers of neurons that extract information about edges, contrast, motion, and color. This entire process can be described in complete physical detail. Every step can be measured. Every neuron can, in principle, be identified. But at no point in that physical description does the redness of red appear. The description contains wavelengths and electrical signals and neural firing patterns. It does not contain the experience of seeing red, the vivid, immediate, qualitative fact of what red looks like from the inside. And the puzzle is not that we have not yet found the right neuron or the right brain region. The puzzle is more fundamental than that. It is that no description of physical processes, as however detailed, seems to logically entail that those processes will be experienced by anyone. Physical description and experiential description seem to be accounts of two different kinds of things, and no one has satisfactorily explained how one gives rise to the other. This is not a new puzzle. Versions of it were identified by the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in the 17th century AD. Leibniz asked his readers to imagine a machine that could think and feel, built large enough to walk inside like a mill. If you walked through it, he argued, you would find only parts pushing against other parts, gears and levers and mechanisms. you would never find thought or perception anywhere in the machinery. The machinery might produce behavior that looks like thinking from the outside, okay? But the inner fact of experience, what it feels like to think, would be nowhere in the mechanism. Leibniz was writing before electricity was understood, before neurons were discovered, before any of the neuroscience we have just discussed existed. And yet the puzzle he identified is precisely the puzzle that modern neuroscience has run into with far more sophisticated tools. Walk through the brain's machinery, metaphorically through its neural circuits and synaptic connections, and you will find extraordinary complexity and specificity. You will not find the experience of seeing red, or feeling grief, or recognizing a familiar face. Those experiences are present. You are having them right now, but they are not visible in the mechanism. The failure identified at the end of the previous chapter has a name. It was given that name in 1994 by an Australian philosopher named David Chalmers at a conference in Tucson, Arizona, and the name has stuck because it captures the situation with unusual precision. Chalmers called it the hard problem of consciousness. And the first thing to understand about it is why he felt the need to distinguish it from the other problems, the ones he called, by contrast, the easy problems. The easy problems of consciousness in Chalmers' framework include explaining how the brain integrates information from different sensory sources, how it focuses attention on some things and filters out others, how it controls behavior in response to stimuli, how it generates language, how it stores and retrieves memories. But Chalmers is explicit that these are not actually easy in any ordinary sense. They are immensely complex scientific challenges that will take decades of further research to fully resolve. But they are easy in one specific sense. They are problems science knows how to approach. You identify the mechanism, build a model, test predictions against observations, refine the model. The method is clear, even when the execution is enormously difficult. Given enough time and resources, there is no principled reason why these problems cannot be solved within the existing scientific framework. The hard problem is different in kind, not just in degree. It is the question of why any physical process is accompanied by subjective experience. Why does the integration of sensory information feel like anything? Why does focusing attention produce an inner sense of concentration? Why does the retrieval of a memory come with the qualitative texture of remembering, that particular feeling of something coming back? Chalmers introduced a useful concept to make the problem precise. He called the qualitative features of experience qualia, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the particular taste of coffee, the felt warmth of sunlight on skin. These are not descriptions of physical properties. They are descriptions of what those physical properties feel like from the inside. And the puzzle is that no physical description of the world seems to logically require that qualia exist. You can describe the wavelength of red light, the neural processing in the visual cortex, the behavioral responses associated with seeing red, and none of that description entails that there is something it feels like to see red. The qualia seem to be an extra ingredient, present in experience, but absent from any purely physical account. To make this vivid, Chalmers introduced a thought experiment that has become one of the most discussed in contemporary philosophy, the philosophical zombie. Imagine a being physically identical to you in every respect. Same neurons, same synaptic connections, same brain activity, same behavior. This being processes information, responds to stimuli, says ouch when injured, and how beautiful when looking at a sunset. But there is nothing it is like to be this being. There is no inner experience. The lights are off. Everything works exactly as in a normal human being, but from the inside, there is nobody home. Chalmers' point is not that such beings exist. It is that they seem conceivable, that there is no logical contradiction in imagining them. And if they are conceivable, that tells us something important. Consciousness is not logically entailed by physical structure and function alone. Something additional is needed to explain it. What that something additional is, that is the hard problem. The door that the hard problem left open leads into one of the strangest rooms in the history of human knowledge. Quantum mechanics is the scientific theory that describes how the physical world behaves at its smallest scales. At the level of atoms, electrons, photons, and the fundamental particles that make up all matter and energy. It was developed primarily in the 1920s by a generation of physicists working across Europe, and it has since become the most precisely tested theory in the history of science. Its predictions have been confirmed experimentally to a degree of accuracy that has no parallel in any other field of inquiry. It works extraordinarily well, and yet, nearly a century after its mathematical foundations were established, the physicists who use it every day still cannot agree on what it means. Not in minor technical details. In the most fundamental questions about the nature of reality that a physical theory can raise. That disagreement among people who all accept the same equations and the same experimental results is not a sign that the theory is wrong. It is a sign that the theory is telling us something about reality that our ordinary concepts are not equipped to process without difficulty. Understanding what quantum mechanics actually says, carefully, without exaggeration, is essential for everything that follows in this documentary. The first key concept is superposition. In ordinary experience, things have definite properties. A coin lying on a table is either heads or tails. A door is either open or closed. A ball is either here or there. At the quantum level, this is not how things work. A quantum particle, an electron for example, does not have a definite position or a definite speed or a definite state of any kind until it is measured. Before measurement, it exists in what physicists call a superposition, a simultaneous combination of multiple possible states. It is not that we simply do not know which state it is in. The mathematics of quantum mechanics, confirmed by experiment, indicates that the particle genuinely does not have a definite state until the act of measurement forces one to occur. Think of it this way. Imagine a coin that, while spinning in the air, is neither heads nor tails, but genuinely both at once. A real physical combination of both possibilities. The moment it lands and you look at it, it becomes one or the other. Before it lands, the question, which side is it, does not have a definite answer. That is superposition, translated into an analogy. The analogy is imperfect, as all analogies for quantum phenomena are. But it captures the essential strangeness. At the quantum level, definite properties do not exist until something interacts with the system to bring them into being. The second key concept is entanglement. When two quantum particles interact under certain conditions, they can become entangled, linked in such a way that they share a single quantum state, regardless of how far apart they subsequently move. Measure a property of one particle, and the corresponding property of the other particle is instantly determined, even if the two particles are on opposite sides of the planet or on opposite sides of the galaxy. This does not allow information to travel faster than light. Physicists have been careful to establish this, but it does mean that the two particles cannot be described as fully independent systems. They remain, in a precise mathematical sense, one thing distributed across space. The unresolved role of the observer in quantum mechanics is philosophically suggestive, but suggestion is not science. For the connection between quantum processes and consciousness to move from interesting possibility to testable hypothesis, someone needed to propose a specific mechanism, a concrete account of where in the brain quantum effects might operate and how they might relate to conscious experience. That proposal came from an unlikely collaboration between a mathematical physicist and an anesthesiologist, and it remains the most scientifically developed attempt to build a bridge between quantum mechanics and the mind. Roger Penrose is one of the most distinguished mathematical physicists of the 20th and 21st centuries. His work on black holes, on the geometry of space-time, and on the mathematical structure of the universe has earned him the highest honors in science, including the Nobel Prize in Physics, awarded in 2020. But for decades, alongside that mainstream work, Penrose pursued a parallel argument about the nature of the human mind, one that most of his colleagues found uncomfortable and many found unconvincing. The argument began with mathematics. Penrose examined a result from mathematical logic, Gödel's incompleteness theorems, established by Kurt Gödel in 1931, which showed that within any sufficiently complex formal mathematical system, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. Penrose argued that human mathematicians can recognize certain mathematical truths that no algorithmic procedure, no step-by-step rule-following computation could ever establish. If that is correct, then the human mind is doing something that cannot be replicated by any computer, however powerful. And if the mind is not a computational system, then whatever it is doing must involve physical processes that are themselves non-computational. Penrose concluded that those processes must be quantum mechanical in nature. Specifically, that they must involve a new kind of quantum event, not fully captured by the existing equations. Stuart Hameroff entered the picture with a proposed location for these quantum events. Hameroff, an anesthesiologist at the University of Arizona, he had spent years studying how anesthetic drugs work, how they switch consciousness off without stopping the brain's basic biological functions. His investigations led him to focus on structures inside neurons called microtubules. Microtubules are tiny protein cylinders that form part of the internal skeleton of cells. They are present in enormous numbers inside neurons, and they play roles in maintaining the cell's structure and organizing its internal transport systems. Hameroff proposed that microtubules might also be the site of quantum computations, that the protein subunits making up the microtubule walls could exist in superpositions of different physical states, and that the orchestrated collapse of those superpositions could give rise to moments of conscious experience. The theory the two developed together is called Orchestrated Objective Reduction, OR for short. The orchestrated part refers to the fact that the quantum processes in microtubules are shaped and regulated by the broader biological activity of the neuron and the brain. They are not random quantum noise, but structured quantum computation. The objective reduction part refers to Penrose's specific proposal for how and why the quantum superposition collapses, not through interaction with a measuring device or an environment, but through a threshold effect built into the structure of space-time itself. When a quantum superposition reaches a certain level of space-time curvature distinction, it spontaneously collapses. And that collapse, in Penrose and Hameroff's account, is a moment of proto-conscious experience. The main scientific objection to Orch-OR has been persistent and pointed. The brain is warm, wet and noisy, full of constant thermal fluctuations that, according to most physicists, would destroy any delicate quantum superposition almost instantaneously, long before it could do any useful computation. This process, called decoherence, is the reason quantum computers need to be cooled to temperatures near absolute zero to function. A biological brain operating at normal body temperature seemed to most physicists like a hopelessly inhospitable environment for quantum coherence. So far, this documentary has moved through philosophy, theology, neuroscience, and physics, through frameworks built by thinkers working at the level of theory and argument. Now we encounter something different. A class of reported human experiences that does not fit neatly into any of those frameworks, that occurs across cultures and continents, and that has, in the past 3 decades, become the subject of rigorous, prospective, peer-reviewed medical research. Near-death experiences are not a new phenomenon. Accounts of them appear in ancient texts, in medieval records, in the writings of people with no knowledge of each other across widely separated historical periods. What is new is the systematic attempt to study them scientifically, and what that attempt has found. The clinical profile of a near-death experience, what researchers have established through large-scale interviews, involves a recognizable cluster of features that appear with remarkable consistency across different individuals, cultures, and religious backgrounds. A sense of leaving the physical body and observing it from above. Movement through a dark tunnel toward a region of intense light. An encounter with the light that is typically described as producing overwhelming feelings of peace, love, and acceptance. Meetings with deceased relatives or other figures. A panoramic review of one's life, not as judgment, but as a kind of complete simultaneous re-experiencing. And a clear, often reluctant return to the body. What makes this clinically interesting is not the content of the experiences alone, striking as that content is. What makes it interesting is the conditions under which these experiences occur. They are reported most frequently by people who have been clinically dead, whose hearts have stopped, whose brains show no organized electrical activity for measurable periods of time. But the question this raises is direct and uncomfortable for standard neuroscience. How does vivid, structured, coherent, conscious experience occur when the biological system believed to produce consciousness has, by every available measure, temporarily stopped functioning? The most important scientific study of this question was conducted by Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel and his colleagues, published in The Lancet in 2001. Van Lommel's study was prospective, meaning patients were enrolled before any cardiac event, not recruited afterward because they had reported unusual experiences. Over a period of 8 years, 344 cardiac arrest patients at 10 Dutch hospitals were interviewed shortly after successful resuscitation. 18% reported some memory of the period of their cardiac arrest. 8% reported a deep or full near-death experience with multiple classic features. Crucially, all of these patients had been clinically dead, with flat electroencephalogram readings confirming absence of measurable brain activity during the period to which their experiences referred. Van Lommel was careful in his conclusions. He did not claim his study proved the existence of a soul or an afterlife. What he claimed was that the current scientific model, in which consciousness is produced by brain activity and therefore cannot exist when brain activity has ceased, was insufficient to account for his data. His patients were not reporting confused, fragmentary impressions of the kind you might expect from a brain struggling under oxygen deprivation. They were reporting clear, structured, emotionally vivid experiences with a consistent narrative shape, and they were reporting them from periods when their brains were, by measurement, not producing the organized activity that consciousness is supposed to require. The standard neurological explanations for near-death experiences deserve honest presentation. Oxygen deprivation, hypoxia, can produce hallucinations and altered states. The brain, under extreme stress, releases endorphins and other neurochemicals that could account for feelings of peace and euphoria. Rapid eye movement intrusion, a state in which dreamlike brain activity breaks through into waking consciousness, has been proposed as a mechanism. Temporal lobe activity, which is associated with feelings of presence, religious experience, and life review, may be relevant. As the near-death experience research points toward an anomaly at the boundary of individual consciousness, a place where the self seems to exceed the physical container we assume it inhabits. That boundary, it turns out, had been mapped from a completely different direction decades earlier, not by a physicist or a cardiologist, but by a Swiss psychiatrist who spent his career paying unusually close attention to what his patients dreamed. Carl Gustav Jung was born in 1875 and died in 1961. He trained under and initially collaborated with Sigmund Freud, whose model of the unconscious mind was already reshaping how the 20th century understood human psychology. But Jung broke with Freud in 1912, and the break was not merely personal, it was theoretical, and it concerned precisely the question of where the self ends. Freud's unconscious was personal. It was a repository of repressed memories, suppressed desires, and unprocessed experiences belonging to a specific individual, material that had once been conscious but had been pushed below the threshold of awareness. Jung accepted this personal unconscious as real, but he argued, based on his clinical observations, that beneath it lay something else, a deeper layer of the psyche that was not personal at all. He called it the collective unconscious. The evidence Jung drew on was varied and, taken individually, not always conclusive. But taken together, it formed a pattern he found impossible to explain through the standard Freudian framework. He noticed that his patients, people with no classical education, no knowledge of ancient mythology, no exposure to the religious traditions of other cultures, would produce in their dreams psychotic episodes and creative visions, the same symbols, figures, and narrative structures that appeared in myths, religious texts, and artwork from cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. A Swiss factory worker with no knowledge of ancient Egypt would dream imagery structurally identical to scenes from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. A patient in the early stages of psychosis would spontaneously produce a vision that matched, in precise symbolic detail, an obscure Mithraic ritual text that Jung had read in an academic library. Jung's explanation was not supernatural in any simple sense. He was not claiming that his patients were accessing a mystical realm through psychic powers. He was making what he considered an empirical claim: that the deepest layer of the human psyche contains inherited structures, templates for experience and behavior that are common to all human beings, regardless of culture, history, or individual experience. He called these templates archetypes. The archetypes are not specific images or stories. They are patterns, predispositions towards certain kinds of experience and representation that then get filled in with culturally specific content. The archetype of the Great Mother is not a specific goddess. It is a deep structural template for the experience of nurturing, containing, generating, and also devouring. A pattern that appears in Isis, in the Virgin Mary, in Kali, in the Earth Mother figures of Indigenous traditions, and in the dreams of people who have never encountered any of these figures consciously. The archetype of the hero is not Hercules or Gilgamesh specifically. It is the pattern of a journey into danger, a confrontation with overwhelming force, and a return transformed. A pattern that Joseph Campbell later mapped across world mythology in his 1949 work, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, drawing directly on Jung's framework. What does this have to do with the soul? The connection operates at two levels. At the first level, Jung's collective unconscious challenges the assumption, carried uncritically through most of the Western philosophical and religious traditions we have examined, that the self is a discrete, bounded individual entity. If the deepest layer of the psyche is genuinely shared across humanity, then the boundary between one person's inner life and another's is not as clean as our ordinary sense of individuality suggests. The self, in Jung's account, is not entirely private. It has a dimension that is common, that connects individual human beings to each other and to the accumulated experiential patterns of the entire human species. That is not the same as the Abrahamic individual soul or the Platonic immaterial substance. But it is also not the neatly bounded individual self of standard materialist psychology. At the second level, Jung himself pushed further. In his later work, particularly in his collaboration with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, Jung developed the concept of synchronicity. Synchronicity refers to meaningful coincidences, events in the outer world that correspond with remarkable precision to inner psychological states or processes without any causal connection between them. A person dreams of a specific rare bird they have never encountered, and the following morning, a bird of exactly that species dies against their window. A patient describes a dream about a golden scarab beetle during a therapy session, and at that precise moment, a scarab-like beetle appears at the window of Jung's consulting room, an event he considered so striking that he interrupted the session to retrieve it. Jung was careful to distinguish synchronicity from superstition. He was not claiming that the mind magically causes external events. He was claiming that mind and matter might, under certain conditions, buy aspects of a single underlying reality that occasionally manifests its unity in ways that become visible to the observer. He called this underlying reality the unus mundus, the one world, borrowing a term from medieval alchemy. And he proposed that the psyche and the physical world were not two entirely separate domains that occasionally influence each other, but two different faces of the same fundamental reality. This is the position that philosophers of mind now call dual aspect monism. The view that consciousness and physical matter are not two substances, but two aspects of a single substance that is itself neither purely mental nor purely physical. It is a position that avoids both the problems of Cartesian dualism. How do two completely different substances interact? And the problems of pure materialism. How does physical matter give rise to subjective experience? By saying that the division between mind and matter is itself a product of perspective rather than a fundamental feature of reality, dual aspect monism dissolves the problem rather than solving it. Jung and Pauli developed these ideas in a correspondence and collaboration that lasted decades, resulting in a joint publication in 1952. Pauli's contribution was significant. He was not merely lending his name to Jung's speculations. He was genuinely convinced that quantum mechanics, with its unresolved measurement problem, its non-local correlations, and its seemingly irreducible role for the observer, was pointing toward the same conclusion that Jung had reached through psychology. While that mind and matter were more deeply connected than the standard scientific picture allowed, Jung approached the boundary of the self from the inside, through dreams, symbols, and the architecture of the unconscious mind. The researcher we turn to now approached it from a completely different direction, through the systematic, methodical investigation of children who claimed to remember being someone else. The work is more empirical, more documentary in character, and more uncomfortable for the scientific mainstream than almost anything else discussed in this documentary. It is also more carefully conducted than its reputation in popular culture might suggest. Ian Stevenson was born in 1918 in Montreal and trained as a psychiatrist at McGill University and later at Louisiana State University, where he eventually became chair of the Department of Psychiatry. He was, by all accounts, a rigorous, methodologically careful scientist with a conventional academic career, until 1960, when he encountered a cluster of cases from India involving children who spoke in detail about previous lives, and published a paper on them in the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. The response from colleagues was largely skeptical, but Stevenson was not deterred. He spent the next 4 decades doing something almost no other credentialed academic scientist had attempted. He built a systematic, cross-cultural database of reincarnation cases, investigated them in person, and subjected them to the most rigorous methodological scrutiny he could devise. By the time of his death in 2007, Stevenson had personally investigated over 2,500 cases from more than 30 countries. His research took him to India, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, Turkey, Nigeria, Alaska, and dozens of other locations. He published his findings in peer-reviewed journals and in detailed academic monographs, most notably a 2-volume work titled Cases of the Reincarnation Type, running to nearly 2,000 pages of documented case material with full methodological notes. The structure of a typical Stevenson case follows a recognizable pattern. A young child, usually between the ages of 2 and 5, begins spontaneously speaking about a previous life. The child typically claims a specific identity, a name, a family, a location, sometimes a cause of death. The child may display behaviors, phobias, or preferences that appear consistent with the claimed previous personality, but inconsistent with their current family environment. A child raised in a family with no connection to violence might display an inexplicable terror of water and claim to have drowned. A child in a family with no military background might show unusual familiarity with weapons and claim to have been a soldier. Stevenson's method was to document these claims before any attempt at verification, to record exactly what the child said, with witnesses, before anyone investigated whether the claimed previous personality actually existed. He would then independently research the claimed details, attempting to identify a real person matching the child's description. In the strongest cases, he could verify the claimed name, family, location, and cause of death, sometimes including details so specific: the location of a hidden object, the name of an obscure relative, the layout of a house the child had never visited. That chance correspondence became statistically implausible as an explanation. The cases Stevenson considered strongest were those involving what he called birthmarks and birth defects. In a subset of cases, the child claiming to remember a previous life had a birthmark or physical abnormality that corresponded, in location and sometimes in shape, to a wound suffered by the person they claimed to have been in a previous life, particularly wounds that caused death. Stevenson documented over 200 such cases with medical records where available, including cases where the deceased person's autopsy records confirmed wound locations that matched the child's birthmark with anatomical precision. One such case involved a boy in Turkey named Cemil Fahrici, who was born with a severely deformed right ear and claimed from early childhood to remember the life of a man named Malu, who had been killed by a shotgun blast to the right side of his head. The family of the deceased Malu was identified and confirmed the cause of death. The location and character of the boy's ear deformity corresponded to the entry wound of the shotgun blast. Stevenson documented this case with medical photographs and family testimonies obtained independently from both families before they were introduced to each other. The objections to Stevenson's work are real and should be stated honestly, as confirmation bias is a genuine risk in this type of investigation. Once a researcher is looking for correspondences, they may find them more readily than a fully blind investigation would support. Cultural contamination is a concern in societies where reincarnation is a widely held belief. Children may absorb information through normal channels that they later present as memories. The possibility of fraud, in at least some cases, cannot be entirely ruled out, particularly in cases where the families of the deceased stood to gain social or financial status from the identification. And the leap from this case is very difficult to explain by normal means. To therefore reincarnation occurred is a logical step that the evidence, even in the strongest cases, does not compel. Stevenson was aware of all of these objections and addressed them in detail in his published work. He explicitly rejected the claim that his evidence proved reincarnation. What he claimed was more modest and more defensible, that the cases, taken as a body of evidence, were consistent with the survival of some form of personal identity beyond death, and that no conventional explanation, fraud, coincidence, cultural contamination, genetic memory, adequately accounted for all of them simultaneously. He used the phrase suggested survival deliberately, maintaining throughout his career the epistemic caution of a scientist who understood the difference between strong evidence and proof. Stevenson's data leaves a gap in the materialist framework. Quantum physics, approached from an entirely different direction, leaves a different but structurally related gap, one that concerns not the survival of personal identity, but something more fundamental. Whether the concept of a separately existing individual thing is even coherent at the deepest level of physical reality. This requires returning to entanglement, which was introduced in the previous physics chapter as a feature of quantum mechanics. But where that chapter introduced entanglement as a descriptive fact, this chapter examines what it actually implies, philosophically, and for the question of where one thing ends and another begins. In 1964, the physicist John Stuart Bell derived a mathematical theorem that has since become one of the most consequential results in the history of physics. Bell's theorem addressed a long-running debate about whether quantum mechanics was complete, whether the apparent randomness and indeterminacy of quantum events might be explained by hidden variables, underlying factors that we simply could not yet measure, which would restore the kind of definite local reality that classical physics assumed. Einstein had famously resisted quantum indeterminacy, arguing that God does not play dice, and had co-authored a paper in 1935 suggesting that quantum mechanics must be incomplete because it allowed what he called spooky action at a distance. The instant correlations between entangled particles that seemed to imply some form of non-local connection. Bell showed mathematically that if the world operates according to local hidden variables, if particles have definite properties determined by local factors, and if no influence travels faster than light, then the correlations between measurements of entangled particles must stay within certain statistical limits. These limits are now called Bell inequalities. The critical feature of Bell's theorem is that it transformed what had been a philosophical disagreement into an empirical question. You could test it in a laboratory. The tests were performed initially by John Clauser in the 1970s, then with increasing precision by Alain Aspect in France in the 1980s, and then by a succession of increasingly rigorous experiments over the following decades. The results were consistent and decisive. The Bell inequalities are violated. The correlations between entangled particles are stronger than any local hidden variable theory can produce. The world is not locally real in the way classical physics and ordinary intuition assume. This finding was recognized with the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022, awarded jointly to Clauser, Aspect, and Anton Zeilinger, whose group had performed the most stringent tests of Bell's theorem with the fewest remaining loopholes. The Nobel Committee's citation described the work as establishing that quantum mechanics is correct and that local realism, the combination of locality and definiteness that underwrites our ordinary picture of a world made of separate things with definite properties, is not how reality actually works. Let that settle for a moment. Now, one of the most rigorously established findings in all of science is that the universe does not, at its most fundamental level, consist of separate things with definite local properties. Entangled particles cannot be fully described as independent systems. They form a single quantum state distributed across space. The measurement of one does not cause the other to take a definite value. It reveals that they were never fully separate to begin with. The philosophical implications of this for the concept of a bounded individual self are significant, though they must be stated carefully. Quantum non-locality does not directly imply that human consciousness is non-local, or that the self extends beyond the brain, or that souls are entangled with each other across space. Those would be large and unwarranted leaps from the physics. What quantum non-locality does imply is that our default picture of reality, as consisting of discrete, separate objects with definite properties, interacting only through local contact, is wrong. At the fundamental level, the universe is a system in which separability is not a basic feature, but an approximation that works well at large scales and breaks down at small ones. This matters for the soul question in a specific way. Both the Western philosophical tradition and the standard materialist framework assume, without much examination, that the self is a locally bounded entity, that consciousness is generated by and contained within a specific physical system, namely the brain, and that it has sharp edges corresponding to the edges of that system. The physics of entanglement does not prove this assumption wrong, but it does demonstrate that the universe's fundamental architecture does not share it. Nature, at its deepest level, does not organize itself into neatly bounded, fully separate systems. It organizes itself into correlated, non-locally connected patterns in which separability is approximate rather than absolute. The Bell inequality violations establish that the universe's fundamental architecture does not support strict separation between systems. The hard problem establishes that consciousness cannot be straightforwardly derived from physical description alone. Taken together, these two findings create pressure on the standard materialist picture from two different directions simultaneously. And that pressure has pushed a growing number of serious philosophers and scientists toward a position that most people, on first encounter, find either obviously wrong or obviously mystical. It is neither. It is a carefully argued philosophical framework with a history stretching back to ancient Greece and a current presence in the most rigorous academic departments of philosophy in the world. The position is called panpsychism. Panpsychism is the view that consciousness, or something relevantly like it, is a fundamental and universal feature of reality, present in some form in all matter, not produced by or emergent from matter, but basic to it in the way that mass, charge and spin are basic to it. This needs to be stated precisely because the popular misunderstanding of panpsychism is almost always the same. People hear it and imagine that rocks are thinking, that electrons are making decisions, that the universe is populated by tiny conscious agents running around inside every atom. That is not what panpsychism claims. What panpsychism claims is that the property of having some form of inner aspect, some minimal form of experience, however primitive and unlike human experience, is as fundamental a feature of physical reality as any other fundamental property. Just as an electron has mass and charge without those properties requiring explanation in terms of something more basic, an electron might have some infinitesimally simple form of experiential character without that requiring explanation in terms of something more basic either. Experience, in this framework, does not emerge from non-experiential matter at some threshold of complexity. It was there from the beginning, in a form so primitive that calling it experience in any rich sense is already an overstatement. But in a form that, as physical systems become more complex and integrated, develops into the rich, unified conscious experience of beings like us. The reason serious philosophers have moved toward this position, and the movement is real, measurable, and ongoing, is primarily the hard problem. If you take the hard problem seriously, if you accept that no physical description of the world, however complete, logically entails the existence of subjective experience, then you face a fundamental choice. Either consciousness is an illusion, there is no genuine inner experience, only the appearance of it, or consciousness, is something that the physical world somehow produces, despite there being no clear mechanism for how it does so. Or consciousness is something that was always already part of the physical world and does not need to be produced at all. Panpsychism is the third option. And for philosophers who find the first option unacceptable because the existence of their own experience is the one thing they cannot seriously doubt, and the second option unexplanatory because emergence from purely non-conscious matter faces exactly the problem Chalmers identified. The third option begins to look less like mysticism and more like the most parsimonious available solution. Philip Goff is currently the most prominent academic advocate of panpsychism. Goff is a philosopher at Durham University in England, and his 2019 book, Galileo's Error, makes a careful historical argument for why consciousness was excluded from the physical picture of the world in the first place. Goff traces the problem to Galileo Galilei, who in the 17th century AD established the mathematical method that became the foundation of modern science. Galileo's crucial methodological move was to focus science exclusively on the quantitative properties of matter: size, shape, number, motion, and to explicitly set aside the qualitative properties: color, taste, smell, felt texture, treating them as subjective responses of the observer rather than features of the world itself. This was a brilliant and productive move for the purposes of building a mathematical science of nature. But Goff argues it had an unintended consequence. It built the exclusion of consciousness into the foundations of science from the very beginning. A science defined by its focus on quantitative, third-person observable properties will, by construction, have difficulty accommodating a phenomenon, consciousness, that is inherently qualitative and first-personal. Panpsychism, in Goff's account, is the correction of this founding error, not an abandonment of science, but a revision of its foundational assumptions, an expansion of the physical picture to include experiential properties as basic features alongside the quantitative ones. Christoph Koch, a prominent neuroscientist who spent decades working alongside the late Francis Crick, co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, on the neural correlates of consciousness. He has independently arrived at a position compatible with panpsychism through his work on integrated information theory. This theory, developed primarily by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, proposes that consciousness is identical to a specific kind of integrated information, a measure called phi, representing the degree to which a system's parts share information in a way that cannot be reduced to the sum of its components. Crucially, integrated information theory implies that any system with non-zero phi has some degree of consciousness, which includes, at very low levels, simple physical systems well below the complexity of a brain. Tononi and Koch have been explicit about this implication and have embraced rather than retreated from it. The combination problem is panpsychism's most serious internal challenge, and it deserves honest presentation. Even granting that electrons or neurons have some primitive experiential property, it is deeply unclear how these micro-experiences combine to produce the unified, rich, single-perspective experience of a human being. When you look at a painting, you do not have a collection of billions of separate micro-experiences corresponding to each neuron's contribution. You have one unified experience, a single visual field with depth, color, meaning, and emotional resonance. How does unity arise from the combination of billions of separate experiential contributions? This is a genuine difficulty, and panpsychists acknowledge it. Various solutions have been proposed. Goff himself has worked on what he calls constitutive panpsychism, but none has achieved consensus. The combination problem remains open. What is significant about panpsychism for this documentary's central question is what it implies about the soul. If consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, not produced by brains but expressed through them, then the brain is not the source of consciousness, but a particular kind of physical structure through which consciousness is organized, focused, and made specific. The soul, in this reading, is not an immaterial substance that inhabits a physical body. It is the universe's fundamental experiential character, locally concentrated and structured by a particular biological system into the specific individual perspective that constitutes a person. Death, on this view, does not destroy consciousness. It dissolves the particular physical structure through which consciousness was being expressed in that specific form. What happens to that experiential character after the dissolution of its organizing structure is a question panpsychism opens rather than answers. But it opens it in a way that is philosophically serious, scientifically informed, and entirely free of the supernatural assumptions that the word soul usually carries. Everything assembled in this documentary so far, the hard problem, quantum non-locality, OR, panpsychism, the anomalous data from near-death experience research and reincarnation case studies, Jung's collective unconscious, has been building toward a direct confrontation with the title question, not as a rhetorical flourish, but as a genuine analytical exercise. What would it actually mean, stated precisely and without vagueness, to claim that the soul is a quantum phenomenon? What is the specific content of that claim, and how does it fare against what we actually know? The claim is not one thing. It is at least three distinct claims of very different strengths, and conflating them is the source of most of the confusion surrounding this topic. Moving through them from weakest to strongest is the clearest way to see what the evidence actually supports. The weakest version of the quantum soul hypothesis is the OR claim, that consciousness involves quantum processes in the brain, specifically in neuronal microtubules, and that because these processes are non-computational, consciousness has properties that purely physical algorithmic accounts cannot capture. This version does not require consciousness to be non-physical. It does not require the soul to survive death. It does not require any expansion of our ontology beyond what physics already contains. It simply requires that the specific physical processes underlying consciousness are quantum mechanical rather than classical, and that this distinction matters for understanding what consciousness is and what it can do. This is the most scientifically grounded version of the claim. It generates testable predictions about the role of microtubules in anesthesia, about quantum coherence, timescales in neurons, about the relationship between quantum computation and specific features of conscious experience. Those predictions are currently being tested. The version is contested, but not dismissed by serious scientists. Its primary weakness is that the decoherence problem, while less decisive than it once appeared, has not been resolved. And Penrose's specific account of objective reduction, the mechanism that gives the theory its distinctive character, remains unconfirmed by independent means. The medium version of the claim is considerably more expansive. It draws on panpsychism and quantum non-locality together and proposes that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, not produced by physical processes, but expressed through them, and that quantum mechanics, because it requires an observer to define outcomes, and because it reveals a fundamentally non-separable universe, is the physical framework most naturally compatible with this view. In this version, the soul is not a ghost in a machine. It is the universe's intrinsic experiential character, organized by biological structures into specific individual perspectives. The quantum mechanics matters here not because neurons are doing quantum computation, but because the universe's quantum structure, its non-locality, its observer dependence, its resistance to classical separability, reflects the same non-separable, observer-involving character that consciousness exhibits from the inside. This version is philosophically serious. It is held in various forms by credentialed thinkers, including Goff, Koch, Tononi, and, in his later work, by the implications of the Pauli-Jung collaboration. Its weakness is that it remains at the level of structural analogy and philosophical argument. The connection between quantum non-locality and the non-local character of consciousness, if consciousness has such a character, has not been formalized in a mathematically precise way that generates testable predictions. It is a framework, not yet a theory in the scientific sense. The strongest version of the claim proposes something that goes further still. That the specific pattern of information constituting a conscious self, the precise configuration of experiential states, memories, and relational connections that makes a particular person who they are, might, under certain physical conditions, persist or propagate beyond the dissolution of the biological system that instantiated it. Not as a ghost or an immaterial substance, but as a quantum information structure. Quantum information, unlike classical information, has distinctive preservation properties. It cannot be perfectly copied, but under certain conditions, it can be preserved in ways that classical information cannot. Whether the brain encodes anything like the relevant kind of quantum information, and whether the conditions for its preservation beyond biological death could conceivably be met, are questions that current physics cannot answer because they have not been formulated precisely enough to investigate. This strongest version has the least scientific support. It is speculative in a way that the previous two versions are not. But it is worth noting that it is not logically incoherent. It does not contradict established physics in the way that, say, faster-than-light travel does. It is simply far beyond what current evidence can address. Laying out three versions of the quantum soul hypothesis is useful. But it risks creating a false impression that the question is simply a matter of choosing between three options and waiting for the evidence to adjudicate. The situation is more fundamental than that. Before asking which version of the hypothesis the evidence supports, there is a prior question that deserves direct attention. What has science actually established about consciousness, and what has it merely assumed? That distinction, when drawn carefully, turns out to be considerably more significant than most popular accounts of neuroscience acknowledge. The established findings are those described in Chapter 6. Brain damage affects consciousness in specific and predictable ways. Anesthesia suspends it. Stimulating specific brain regions produces specific experiences. These findings are real, replicated, and not in dispute. And they establish beyond reasonable doubt that the brain is causally involved in conscious experience, that what happens in the brain affects what happens in consciousness with a precision and specificity that cannot be coincidental. What these findings do not establish, and this is the crucial distinction, is the direction and completeness of that causal relationship. The evidence shows that brain states and conscious states are correlated, and that manipulating brain states manipulates conscious states. It does not show that the brain generates consciousness in the sense of being its ultimate source. The correlation is consistent with generation. It is also consistent with mediation. The difference between these two interpretations can be made vivid with a concrete analogy. Consider a television set receiving a broadcast signal. The quality and character of what appears on screen depends entirely on the functioning of the television's components. Damaged specific circuits and specific aspects of the picture are degraded or lost. Switch the television off, and the picture disappears entirely. An observer who knew nothing about broadcast signals, studying only the relationship between the television's components and its output, might reasonably conclude that the television generates the picture, that the picture is produced by and contained within the television set. That conclusion would be consistent with every observation available to them. It would also be wrong. The television mediates and displays a signal that originates elsewhere. This analogy has limits that must be stated honestly. We do not currently have evidence of a consciousness signal originating outside the brain, the way a broadcast signal originates outside a television set. The analogy does not prove that the brain is a receiver rather than a generator. What it demonstrates is that the neuroscientific evidence, taken on its own terms, underdetermines the metaphysical conclusion. The evidence is consistent with generation. It is also consistent with mediation. Choosing between these interpretations requires additional argument or evidence beyond what the neuroscience itself provides. This is not a fringe position designed to smuggle the soul back into a scientific framework that has excluded it. It is a standard point in the philosophy of science and the philosophy of mind, made by philosophers with no particular commitment to the soul's existence. The neuroscientific evidence constrains what any adequate theory of consciousness must say. It does not, by itself, determine what that theory must be. What science has also not ruled out follows directly from this. It has not ruled out that consciousness involves non-computational quantum processes, as OR proposes. It has not ruled out that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality that the brain organizes rather than generates, as panpsychism proposes. It has not ruled out that the anomalous data from near-death experience, research and reincarnation case studies reflects genuine phenomena that current frameworks cannot accommodate. And it has not ruled out that the self's boundaries are less fixed and less locally determined than the standard picture assumes. As both quantum non-locality and Jung's collective unconscious suggest from different directions, None of these things being ruled out is equivalent to their being established. That distinction must be maintained scrupulously. The history of science contains many examples of phenomena that were not ruled out by existing frameworks, and that turned out, on investigation, to be real. It also contains many examples of phenomena that were not ruled out, and that turned out to be illusory. Not being ruled out is a beginning, not a conclusion. What can be said with confidence, and this is the honest reckoning the chapter title promises, is that the strong materialist conclusion most people absorb from popular accounts of neuroscience is not what the evidence actually shows. The conclusion that consciousness is nothing but brain activity, that the self is entirely locally bounded, that death is straightforwardly the end of experience. These conclusions are not scientific findings. They are philosophical interpretations of scientific findings, and they are interpretations that the findings underdetermine. The findings are consistent with them. The findings are also consistent with something more. That something more is not identified, not proven, and not yet fully formulated. But the space it occupies is real, and that space is precisely where the soul question has always lived. Identifying a space that the evidence leaves open is not, by itself, a reason to populate that space with any particular answer. Gaps in knowledge are common in science. Most of them get filled eventually, nor with explanations that have nothing to do with the dramatic possibilities that the gap initially seemed to invite. So the question that needs addressing directly before the final chapter closes this documentary is why the soul question specifically deserves serious ongoing investigation rather than patient waiting for neuroscience to complete its work and fill the gap in the ordinary way. There are 3 distinct arguments for taking it seriously, and they operate at different levels. The first is purely scientific. The hard problem of consciousness is not a gap of the ordinary kind, a region where the mechanism is not yet known, but where the form of the eventual explanation is already clear. It is a gap of a different character entirely. In most scientific gaps, we know what kind of answer we are looking for. We do not yet know which proteins fold in which configurations, but we know that proteins fold according to physical and chemical laws, and that a detailed enough model will eventually account for the behavior. The gap is one of detail, not of framework. The consciousness gap is different. We do not currently have a framework within which the explanation would even make sense. No one has proposed a coherent account of how a physical process, however complex, however precisely described, gives rise to the qualitative first personal fact of experience. The form of the explanation is itself unknown. That is a different kind of problem, and it is the kind of problem that has historically required not more data gathered within the existing framework, but a fundamental revision of the framework itself. The history of science supports this assessment. When astronomers in the 19th century AD observed that the orbit of Mercury did not quite match the predictions of Newtonian mechanics, the anomaly was small, a tiny discrepancy in the rate at which the orbit's orientation shifted over time. It was tempting to assume that a more precise application of Newtonian principles would resolve it. Perhaps an undiscovered planet, perhaps a more careful measurement. It was not resolved that way. It required Einstein's general theory of relativity, a complete reconception of what gravity is and how space-time works, to account for it. A small anomaly required a large framework revision. The consciousness problem is not a small anomaly. It is a foundational one. The framework revision it may require could be correspondingly large. And a framework large enough to accommodate consciousness in a satisfying way may, as a consequence, have something to say about what the soul is. The second argument is historical. The pattern of scientific progress contains a recurrent feature: questions that appeared metaphysical, beyond the reach of empirical investigation, have repeatedly turned out to be scientific questions once the right conceptual tools were developed. The nature of lightning was once a metaphysical question, answered by theology. The origin of species was once a metaphysical question, considered permanently beyond the reach of natural explanation. The age of the universe was once considered not just unknown, but unknowable in principle. Each of these became a scientific question when new frameworks and new instruments made the relevant evidence accessible. The soul question is currently in a similar position. It appears to be beyond the reach of available scientific tools. That appearance has been wrong before. It may be wrong again. Treating the question as permanently closed on the basis of current inability to address it is not scientific caution. It is a failure of historical imagination. The third argument is the most immediate. The soul question is not a purely theoretical matter with no practical consequences. It underlies directly and consequentially how human beings and human societies answer questions that have immediate moral and practical weight. How we think about death, whether we approach it with terror, acceptance, or genuine uncertainty, is shaped by our implicit or explicit beliefs about what, if anything, persists beyond it. How we think about the boundaries of moral consideration, which kinds of beings have inner lives that matter, and how much they matter, depends on what we think consciousness is and where it is found. If panpsychism is correct, the scope of moral consideration expands dramatically. If consciousness is strictly locally bounded in individual human brains and nowhere else, it contracts. These are not abstract philosophical consequences. They bear on how we treat each other, how we treat other animals, how we think about artificial intelligence, and how we face the certainties of aging and loss. The honest middle position is uncomfortable to inhabit. That discomfort is worth naming directly because it is the most reliable sign that the question is being taken at its actual weight rather than at a reduced version that is easier to manage. Easy questions do not require honest middle positions. They require correct answers. The soul question has resisted correct answers for as long as human beings have been asking it. Not because people have not tried hard enough, but because the question is genuinely, structurally difficult in ways that this documentary has tried to make precise. So where does that leave us? Not where popular culture usually leaves this conversation, either in the warm certainty of religious tradition or in the cool dismissal of scientific materialism. It leaves us somewhere more specific and more interesting than either of those positions. It leaves us with a detailed picture of what is actually known, what is genuinely uncertain, and what the shape of that uncertainty tells us about the territory we have been exploring. What is actually known can be stated clearly. The brain is causally involved in conscious experience in ways that are specific, reproducible, and not in serious dispute. Neuroscience has mapped those relationships with increasing precision over the past century and will continue to do so. Quantum mechanics is the most accurate physical theory ever developed, and it describes a universe that is fundamentally non-local, observer-involving, and resistant to the classical picture of a world made of neatly bounded, fully separate things. The hard problem of consciousness is a genuine, unsolved problem in philosophy and science, acknowledged as such by the researchers closest to it. And it is a problem that has not yielded to standard scientific methods despite serious and sustained effort. Multiple independent lines of empirical investigation, near-death experience research, reincarnation case studies, the anomalous findings in quantum biology, have produced datasets that current frameworks cannot fully account for, and that the mainstream has largely declined to engage with rather than explain. What is genuinely uncertain is equally specific. Whether quantum processes in neuronal microtubules play a functional role in consciousness remains unresolved. The Orch-OR theory generates testable predictions that experiments are beginning to address, and the outcome is not yet clear. Whether consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality or an emergent product of physical complexity is a live philosophical debate with serious arguments on multiple sides and no consensus in sight. Whether any aspect of personal identity, experience, or information persists beyond biological death in any form is a question that the current evidence raises but does not answer. Whether the self's boundaries are as locally fixed as ordinary experience suggests, or whether consciousness has relational and non-local dimensions that our individualist frameworks have systematically obscured, is a question that quantum physics, depth psychology, and indigenous philosophical traditions have each approached from different directions without yet producing a convergent, testable account. That is the honest picture. It is not a picture of science triumphantly closing in on a question that philosophy and religion have failed to answer. It is a picture of a question that has proven more resistant to resolution than anyone in any tradition has fully acknowledged, and that resistance is itself informative. When a question persists with this kind of tenacity across this many independent fields of inquiry, across this many centuries, across this many cultures with no contact with each other, that persistence is a signal, not proof of any particular answer, but a signal that the question is tracking something real about the structure of experience and reality, something that is genuinely there to be understood, even if the understanding has not yet arrived. The soft lean this documentary takes, the position that something in this picture remains genuinely unexplained, is not a concession to wishful thinking. It is a reading of the evidence. The evidence does not establish that the soul, in any traditional sense, is real. But the evidence also does not establish that consciousness is nothing but brain activity, that the self is nothing but a narrative constructed by neurons, that death is straightforwardly the end of experience, or that the universe contains no more room for inner life than the standard materialist picture allows. The evidence is genuinely open in ways that its popular presentation almost never acknowledges. Holding that openness honestly, without collapsing it prematurely in either direction, is not a failure to reach a conclusion. It is the correct conclusion, given what the evidence currently shows. There is one final thing worth saying, and it concerns not the science or the philosophy, but the human experience of asking this question at all. Now, every tradition examined in this documentary, Greek, Abrahamic, Indigenous, the tradition of scientific inquiry itself, has circled this question with something that exceeds purely intellectual curiosity. There is urgency in it. There is personal stakes. The question of whether there is something about a person that exceeds physical description is not merely an abstract puzzle about the metaphysics of mind. It is a question about what you are, about whether the people you have lost are entirely gone, about whether the inner life you experience every waking moment has weight and significance beyond its physical correlates. It is a question that human beings have been unable to stop asking, not because they are confused or irrational, but because the question connects to something central about what it means to be the kind of being that asks questions at all. A being that is aware of its own existence, that can reflect on its own nature, that can ask with genuine uncertainty whether that awareness is the product of 3 pounds of biological tissue or whether it touches something that the tissue is an expression of. No other known entity in the universe does this. That fact does not prove the soul exists, but it is the most remarkable fact about consciousness that we have. The fact that consciousness is the kind of thing that wonders about itself. And wonder, directed honestly and rigorously at real questions, is where every genuine advance in human understanding has started. The question of whether the soul is a quantum phenomenon is, in its deepest form, a question about what consciousness ultimately is, and where it fits in the picture of reality that science is slowly constructing. That question is open. The investigation is ongoing. The most honest thing that can be said at the current state of knowledge is that something in the picture remains unexplained, and that the unexplained thing is not a peripheral detail. It is the most central feature of the only reality any of us has ever directly encountered. If this documentary has done its job, you are leaving it not with an answer, but with a better understanding of why the question is as hard as it is, why it matters as much as it does, and why the honest position, uncertain, rigorous, are genuinely open, is more interesting than the comfortable alternatives on either side. If these questions interest you, if the intersection of consciousness, physics, philosophy, and the oldest questions human beings have asked feels like territory worth exploring further, then subscribe. Every video on this channel approaches difficult questions with the same commitment. Follow the evidence, represent the uncertainty honestly, and never mistake the absence of a simple answer for the absence of a real question. There is more of this territory to cover. The investigation continues.